There's a very common interpretation of Robert Nozick's Libertarianism in Anarchy, State, and Utopia that I'm going to argue is mistaken. The interpretation says that the following is the central argument in his book. Premise 1, we're all totally self-owners. Premise 2, a lot of the things that the more than minimal state does violates our self-ownership rights. Conclusion, therefore the more than minimal state is unjust or illegitimate. Notice how the argument treats strong libertarian type self-ownership rights as foundational, but there's no argument for them. No one who isn't already sympathetic to libertarianism will find such a foundation remotely plausible. But do a word search on self-ownership in Anarchy, State, and Utopia. You might be surprised to find that it turns up exactly one time. The argument that commentators suggest is central to the book doesn't show up anywhere in it. So what's going on? Part of what may be confusing them is that Nozick has different targets in his book. Part 1 of the book, the section on anarchy, is directed at a tiny group of anarcho-capitalists who think that because people have very strong rights not to be subject to coercive interference, that no kind of state, not even a minimal one, is legitimate. Nozick argues against them by showing that even if we have these strong non-interference rights, and we started out with any state at all, a minimal state would probably develop out of people's voluntary interactions and without violating anyone's rights. It's an internal critique that starts with their premises and arrives at a conclusion they don't like. But what about the more than minimal state? He's addressing their defenders in part 2, the section on state. But the way he addresses them isn't by pointing out that we're all totally self-owners and that a lot of the things that the more than minimal state does violates our self-ownership rights. If he meant to do that, part 2 could be a lot shorter. Instead, Nozick realizes that these premises about self-ownership are pretty controversial. So rather than criticizing the more than minimal state by showing that it's incompatible with libertarian premises, he criticizes it by trying to show that it's incompatible with various and widely shared moral commitments, like Rawls's own commitment to the priority of certain basic rights and liberties. This is the point of his famous Wilt Chamberlain thought experiment in part 2. Assume, like Rawls does, that occupational choice is a basic liberty. Wilt goes for basketball. Assume also, like Rawls does, that people have a basic right to own personal property. Many people will choose to allocate bits of their personal property in such a way that Wilt ends up with lots more, such that some favored pattern of distribution and resources is upset. Nozick is simply saying to Rawls, hey, you're going to have to pick. Now, it's fair to say that Nozick probably does accept the simple libertarian argument, but it's not fair to say that he ever relied on it.